The trash bag hit the center of the ballroom floor like a gunshot. Every conversation in the Grand Hyatt Seoul stopped. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. A woman in a 30 million won gown turned so fast her diamond earring caught the chandelier light and threw a small arc of brilliance across the ceiling. The 12-piece orchestra stumbled through half a bar before the conductor realized nobody was listening and brought his baton down into silence, so complete it had weight. Kang Min-jae stood exactly where he had kicked it from, adjusting the cuff of his charcoal jacket with the calm of a man who had just done nothing more remarkable than check the time. He was 32 years old. He had broken 3 men's jaws before his 25th birthday, buried 2 enemies before his 30th, and had never once in his adult life said anything he did not mean. The 4 bodyguards positioned around the room's perimeter did not move. They had learned long ago that when their employer did something unexpected, the correct response was absolute stillness. The Grand Hyatt Seoul Ballroom was the most expensive room in Korea on this particular Friday evening. The annual Kang Foundation Charity Gala had a guest list that read like a directory of everything money could purchase in this country. Actresses whose faces appeared on every second billboard along the Gangnam Expressway, the wives of politicians who smiled carefully for cameras, technology heirs who wore their wealth in the deliberately understated way of people who have never needed to prove it. The event existed, according to its gold-embossed invitations, to raise funds for struggling families across Korea. Nobody in this room had thought about a struggling family in the last 3 hours. They had been thinking about Min-jae. He had arrived exactly 12 minutes late, which everyone understood was deliberate. The charcoal suit, the 4 bodyguards, the way he moved through the crowd without adjusting his path for anyone so that people simply stepped aside, the way water moves around stone. He was not the wealthiest man in the room. He was something the wealthiest men in the room were quietly afraid of, which was a different and more interesting kind of power entirely. Women had positioned themselves with the careful strategy of chess pieces all evening. An actress had laughed too loudly near the entrance at the exact moment he walked in. A socialite in a red dress had leaned forward at a precise angle every time he glanced in her direction. An influencer had dropped her clutch directly in his path and looked up at him with eyes that had clearly rehearsed the expression in a mirror for longer than she would ever admit. He had stepped over the clutch without looking down. He accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, turned to survey the room with the quiet, calculating eyes of a man who has never once been surprised by human behavior. And that was when he saw her. She was in the far corner of the ballroom, half hidden behind a decorative pillar that someone had wrapped in white orchids for the occasion. She was a large, full-figured black woman in a plain gray cleaning uniform, and she was struggling with a trash bag that had been overfilled by people who had not considered, even for a single moment, the person who would eventually have to carry it. Her dark brown skin was warm under the chandelier light. Her natural hair was pulled back tightly beneath a plain cleaning cap. Sweat had gathered at her temples. Her jaw was set with the particular expression of someone managing physical discomfort and has decided not to perform it for anyone's benefit. Not a single person near her acknowledged her existence. 3 guests had actively shifted positions to keep their designer outfits at a safe distance from her work. A man in a tuxedo had turned his back to her, completely mid-conversation. The smooth, unconscious motion of someone erasing an inconvenience from their peripheral vision. Min-jae watched this for a long, cold moment. Then he looked back at the room, at the auction paddles rising for a children's literacy fund, lifted by hands wearing watches that cost more than a classroom teacher earns in 2 years. At the actress repositioning herself again near the entrance with the persistence of a compass needle finding north. At the influencer's clutch still sitting on the floor where she had deliberately dropped it because, apparently, someone else would deal with that too. Something moved through him that was beyond anger and beyond disgust. It was the feeling of seeing something clearly that you have been choosing not to see. and finding you can no longer choose it. He set his champagne glass on the nearest table. He walked to where a careless guest had left a half-filled trash bag sitting against a chair leg. He picked it up, and with the full force of a decision already made before he had consciously arrived at it, he kicked it hard across the polished marble floor. It skidded and spun and came to rest in the precise center of the ballroom. The room held its breath. "The next woman," Kang Min-jae said, in a voice that carried to every corner without being raised. "Who picks up that trash bag becomes my wife." The silence held for 4 full seconds. Then the laughter started. Nervous at first, the unsure laughter of people checking each other's faces for the correct response. And then louder, spreading through the ballroom like a wave discovering its shape. Because surely this was theater. Surely Kang Min-jae, linked in gossip columns to an actress, and before that to the daughter of a shipping magnate, was not standing in Seoul's most prestigious charity gala, making a genuine matrimonial offer, contingent on garbage collection. The actress near the entrance examined her nails. The socialite in red became deeply absorbed in her phone. The influencer took 3 careful steps backward. Nobody moved toward the trash bag. And then someone did. She came from the corner near the pillar. Not from the crowd of guests, from the working side of the room. She set down the overfilled bag she had been carrying with the careful deliberateness of someone who does not put things down carelessly. And she walked across the marble floor. Her steps were quiet and unhurried. She did not look at Kang Min-jae. She did not look at the cameras appearing in hands throughout the crowd. She did not look at the 300 people watching her cross that floor. She looked at the trash bag, because that was what she had come to deal with. Jessica Mensah was 28 years old. She had grown up in Kumasi, Ghana, in a household where her father, a secondary school teacher named Emmanuel Mensah, had raised her to understand that honest work was never beneath a person of dignity. He had told her this while polishing his own shoes before school every morning, while fixing neighbors' leaking pipes on weekends because he could, and they needed it, while carrying his own groceries from Kajetia market without embarrassment, regardless of who saw him. Her father had been gone for 4 years, but the lesson had not gone anywhere. She reached the trash bag. She picked it up with both hands, assessed it, tied it efficiently at the top, and straightened up. Then she turned to carry both bags toward the service exit. The ballroom was absolutely silent. 38 phones were recording. She pushed through the service exit door without looking back. It swung shut behind her with a soft, final sound that seemed to echo in the room long after it had stopped. Min-jae had not moved. He was staring at the door. Now, before we find out what happens next, if you are new here, welcome. You just witnessed the moment that stopped an entire ballroom in Seoul and broke the internet overnight. And I promise you, what comes after that door swings shut is going to hit you even harder than what you just watched. This channel is where we tell stories like this one. Stories about love that arrives through the wrong door. Stories about ordinary people who turn out to be extraordinary. Stories about the moments that change everything without announcing themselves first. The kind of stories that stay with you long after the video ends. If that sounds like something your life needs more of, and I think it does because you are still here, hit that subscribe button right now, not later, right now before we go any further, and turn on your notifications so the next story finds you the moment it goes live. You do not want to miss what is coming. For those of you who have been here before, welcome back. You already know what this channel delivers. Drop a comment right now and let the new people know they are in exactly the right place. Now, Min-jae is still standing in that ballroom. He has not moved. He is still staring at the door that just swung shut behind a Ghanaian cleaning woman who did not look back. And an 81-year-old man, the most powerful patriarch in the Kang criminal dynasty, has just placed his hand on his grandson's shoulder with the weight of something that has already been decided. Let us get back to Seoul. A hand settled on his shoulder. the weight of something that had already been decided. Kang Do-hyun was 81 years old and had built an empire from the particular combination of ruthlessness and patience that most men can manage one of, but rarely both simultaneously. He had not laughed with the rest of the room. He had watched everything with the complete, unhurried attention of a man who has seen too much of human nature to be surprised by it. He leaned close to his grandson's ear. "A Kang man," he said, quietly enough that only Min-jae could hear, "has never broken his word. You know this." Min-jae turned to look at him. His grandfather's face held no amusement, no judgment, no warmth, and no coldness. Only the absolute seriousness of a man stating a fact about the physical world. The sun rises in the east. A Kang man does not break his word. Min-jae turned back to the service exit door. By the time the gala ended, the first video had 7 million views. By morning, it had crossed 50. By the following afternoon, the number had climbed beyond any reasonable measurement, and the name Jessica Mensah, pulled from the cleaning company's publicly listed staff roster by a journalist who worked faster than was perhaps decent, was trending in Korea, in Ghana, in Nigeria, in the United Kingdom, in the United States, and in 43 other countries that had collectively decided they had an opinion about a woman picking up a trash bag in Seoul. Jessica found out from a phone call. She was sitting on the edge of her single bed in the small room she rented, near the cleaning company's depot, in the Mapo district of Seoul. The room had a window that faced the building's interior courtyard. It had a hot plate, a small shelf of provisions she had brought from the Ghanaian grocery in Itaewon. Dried fish, shito pepper sauce, a tin of sardines, a bag of rice, and 3 photographs on the table beside the bed. Her mother Abena, standing outside the chop bar she ran on a street in Kumasi, her wide smile catching the afternoon light. Her younger brother Kofi in his university orientation photograph, looking simultaneously proud and terrified in a way that made Jessica laugh every time she looked at it. And a photograph of her father Emmanuel, taken the year before he died, standing in front of his classroom with his hands clasped behind his back and the expression of a man exactly where he belongs. Her phone rang. It was Kofi. His voice was so high with panic that she had to ask him to repeat himself 3 times before the words assembled into something her mind could hold. She listened until he finished. Then she asked him to send her the videos. She watched them sitting on her bed in the quiet of her Mapo room. She watched herself cross that marble floor. She watched herself pick up the bag and tie it and walk toward the service exit, with her back to 300 people and 38 recording phones. She watched the room, frozen behind her. She watched Kang Min-jae, staring at the door after it closed. She put her phone down on the bed. She sat for a long moment in the particular silence of someone who understands that their life has just changed shape and is not yet sure into what. Then she called her supervisor and asked, with the careful evenness of someone managing something enormous in a very quiet voice, whether she still had a job. She still had a job. For exactly 1 more day, the cleaning company's director called her the following morning, with the tone of a man who has made a decision he finds regrettable but final and has chosen to dress it as concern. He explained that the media attention was creating disruption, that journalists were waiting outside the depot, that it would be better for everyone, himself included, if she took an indefinite leave while the situation resolved itself. Jessica listened to the full explanation without interrupting. "Am I being let go?" she asked when he was finished. A pause long enough to be its own answer. "We prefer to think of it as—" "I understand," she said. She ended the call. She made a list the way her mother had taught her, to do when something felt too large to hold all at once. She wrote it on the back of an envelope from her last electricity bill. Job gone, rent due in 10 days, Kofi's university fees due at the end of the month, the money she sent home every month to help her mother with the chop bar's running costs, the amount sitting in her account. which she knew precisely without checking. She looked at the list for a long time. Then she put it in the drawer, washed her face, and went to buy rice, because she had not eaten since the previous afternoon, and collapsing on an empty stomach had never solved anything in the history of the world. The market, near her building, was 8 minutes away. She made it 3 before the first person recognized her, a young Korean woman with a phone already raised. Then 2 men who pulled out their phones simultaneously. Then a small gathering that assembled around her with the organic speed of a crowd that has found something it considers worth circling. Jessica kept walking at the same pace, eyes forward, market bag at her side. The sound of camera shutters followed her down the street like rain on a tin roof. She bought her rice. She bought a tin of mackerel. She bought a small bunch of spring onions because her father had always said a meal without something green in it was just fuel and not food. She walked back through the small crowd that had grown while she was inside the market, excused herself politely through the middle of it, and went home. That evening, she called her mother. Mensah answered on the second ring, the way she always did, as though she had been nearby and waiting, which she probably had been because Abena always seemed to know when her children needed her, before they called to confirm it. Jessica, her mother's voice, deep and warm and carrying within it the particular steadiness of a woman who has raised 2 children alone after loss, and has not once let them see her buckle under the weight of it. I have seen everything. Tell me you are all right. I am all right, Mommy. Tell me the truth. A pause. I am managing. That is different from all right. Yes, Jessica said. It is. Her mother was quiet for a moment. In the background, Jessica could hear the sounds of the chop bar, pots, voices, the specific music of a kitchen working at full capacity in the early evening. Her mother had not stopped cooking to take this call. She never stopped for worry. She cooked through it. Your father, Abena said finally, used to say that a person's character is not what they do when everyone is watching. It is what they do when they believe nobody is. A pause. 300 people were watching you, my daughter, and you did exactly what you would have done if the room had been empty. Jessica pressed her lips together hard. He would have been very proud, her mother said. Jessica looked at the photograph of Emmanuel Mensah standing in front of his classroom with his hands clasped behind his back. I know, she said quietly. I know he would. 3 days after the gala, 2 men arrived at her building in Mapo. They wore suits that cost more than 3 months of her cleaning salary, and they stood in the narrow corridor outside her door with the polite, immovable patience of people who are not accustomed to waiting but have been specifically instructed to be civil about it. They told her that Chairman Kang Do-hyun would like to meet with her at her earliest convenience. Jessica looked at them both carefully, at the suits, at the earpieces, at the way they positioned themselves without appearing to position themselves. Do I have a choice? She asked. The taller one opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. The chairman is very much looking forward to the conversation, he said. Jessica considered this for a moment. Then she went back inside her room and stood in front of the small mirror above the wash basin. She looked at herself for a long, quiet moment, at her dark brown face, at the natural hair she had taken down from its work cap and needed to properly retie, at the woman looking back at her from a rented room in Mapo who had somehow become the most discussed person in 43 countries overnight. She thought about what her father used to say when she was nervous before something important. You are Emmanuel Mensah's daughter. Walk in like you know it. She retied her hair. She put on her best dress, a wrap dress in deep Ankara, print, green and gold geometric pattern that her mother had sent from Kumasi in a care package 3 months ago with a note that said, "Wear this somewhere beautiful." She put on the small gold stud earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. She picked up her bag. She went. The Kang family estate sat behind high walls in a part of Seoul where the streets were wide and the trees had been growing long enough to form a canopy that filtered the light into something deliberate and golden. The sitting room where Do-hyun received her was larger than the entire floor of her apartment building in Mapo. There were flowers on a central table, arranged with the precision of someone whose only occupation was arranging flowers. The tea that appeared without anyone being asked was served in porcelain cups, so fine the light passed through them slightly. Jessica sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, and she looked at the old man across from her without looking away. Kang Do-hyun looked back. He was smaller than she had expected from photographs. Old age had reduced his physical dimensions without touching the quality of his attention, which was complete and still, and gave the impression of a man reading things about her she had not said aloud. His hands, resting on the arms of his chair, were spotted and veined and absolutely steady. He looked at her Ankara dress for a moment, at the gold stud earrings, at the way she sat, not performing comfort she did not feel, but not performing discomfort either, simply present, in the particular way of someone who has decided that this room does not get to diminish her. "You wore something meaningful to come here," he said. It was not a question. Jessica looked at him. "My mother sent it from Ghana. She told me to wear it somewhere beautiful." Something moved across the old man's face. "And is this somewhere beautiful?" "The garden is," Jessica said honestly. "I saw it through the car window coming in." Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. Then something that was not quite a smile but was related to one settled at the corners of his eyes. He explained the situation with a directness she found, despite herself, genuinely respectful. The Kang family traditions. What a public vow meant within their world. Why it could not be walked back simply because the circumstances were inconvenient. He told her that her financial situation would be addressed. Her rent, her brother's university fees, the monthly amount she sent home to her mother. He told her she would want for nothing inside the family estate. He told her that his grandson did not want this marriage. He said this plainly, without apology or softening, as a fact she deserved to have. "I know," Jessica said, "and yet here you are. You sent 2 men to my door." "I send men to many doors," Do-hyun said. "Most people are already standing up before I finish the sentence. You asked whether you had a choice." A silence settled between them. The tea cooled slightly in its beautiful cups. "I want you to understand something," Jessica said. "I did not pick up that bag to become anyone's wife. I picked it up because it was on the floor, and I am a cleaner, and that is my work. I did not plan anything. I did not arrange anything. I walked across a floor and did my job." "I know," Do-hyun said. "I was watching." "Then you also know," she said carefully, "that I am not someone who performs. I do not know how to be something I am not, and I have never wanted to learn. If I come into this house, I will be exactly who I am. A Ghanaian woman from Kumasi. A cleaner. Emmanuel Mensah's daughter. That is what your family gets. If that is not acceptable, then we should end this conversation now, and I will find another cleaning contract, and we will both move forward." The old man looked at her for a long time. "Emmanuel Mensah," he repeated slowly. "Your father." "He was a teacher," Jessica said. "He died 4 years ago. He taught me that honest work is never beneath a person of dignity." He was right. Do-hyun was quiet. His spotted hands were very still on the arms of the chair. "My wife," he said finally, "was the daughter of a fisherman from the south coast. My family told me she was beneath us, that I would embarrass everyone who mattered." He paused. "She was the only person in my life who consistently told me the truth when I did not want to hear it. Do you know what that is worth when you are a powerful man, surrounded by people who need things from you?" Jessica waited. "It is worth everything," he said quietly. Everything else is furniture. He reached forward and lifted his teacup. He drank. He set it down with the deliberate care of a very old man who has learned to be precise about small things. "We do not always get to choose our beginnings," he said. "Only what we make of them." Jessica looked at her hands, at the calluses along her palms from years of work, at the gold studs in her ears that had belonged to her grandmother, who had also been a woman who walked into rooms and did not apologize for taking up space in them. "I need to be able to speak to my family whenever I want," she said. "My mother, my brother. No restrictions, no monitoring. I need to come and go without asking permission, and I need it understood clearly that I am not here to perform anything for anyone. I will be respectful. I will be fair. But I will be myself." Do-hyun looked at her steadily. "Those are reasonable terms. There is one more thing." He waited. "When this is over," she said, "however it ends, I walk away with my dignity. Whatever happens in this house, whatever people say outside it, that is mine and it is not negotiable." The old man looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, with the gravity of someone who understands they are in the presence of a particular kind of person and is making a specific choice about how to honor that. "Agreed," he said. Kang Min-jae was in the entrance hall when the car brought her the following morning. He had told himself he was simply passing through. He had been in the upstairs study when the car came through the gates, and he had watched from the window as Jessica Mensah stepped out into the morning light in her Ankara wrap dress and her grandmother's gold earrings, carrying a single bag that was not large enough to suggest someone planning permanence, and something about the way she moved, unhurried, taking in the estate with the calm observational attention of someone learning a new environment rather than being intimidated by one, had pulled him downstairs before he consciously decided to go. He said nothing when she walked in. He simply looked at her with the full assessing attention he used on people. He was trying to understand. And she looked back at him. Her eyes were dark brown and completely level. She was a full-figured woman, several inches shorter than him, in a dress that was the most colorful thing that had entered this house in a very long time. She smelled faintly of shea butter and something warm he could not identify. She looked back at him with the expression of someone who has already decided she will not be frightened by this man, and finished making that decision before she walked through the door. "I want to be clear about something," Min-jae said. "All right," Jessica said. "I don't believe for a single moment that what happened at that gala was accidental. I think you positioned yourself. I think you waited for the right moment and you took it." Jessica looked at him with an expression that was neither hurt nor angry. It was the expression of someone who has heard something incorrect and is deciding how much energy to spend on it. "You kicked a trash bag into the center of a ballroom," she said. "I picked it up because it was on the floor and I am a cleaner. That is the complete story. There is no other version. That is a very convenient. It is the true one," she said simply, "which is different from convenient." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she shifted her bag to her other hand and looked toward the housekeeper, who was standing at a respectful distance. "Could someone please show me to my room?" she asked, and she walked past Kang Min-jae, past the most feared man in Seoul's criminal underworld, past the man whose name made rooms go quiet and whose reputation had been built across 32 years of never being moved by anything, as though he were simply a person standing in a hallway she needed to move through. He turned and watched her go. He stood in the entrance hall for a moment after her footsteps had faded up the staircase, in a silence that felt different from the usual silence of this house, and could not immediately identify why. The Kang estate had 43 rooms, and Jessica learned all of them within the first week. Not because anyone offered to show her. Nobody offered her anything. The housekeeper, Mrs. O, had delivered a brief tour on the first day with the mechanical efficiency of someone completing an assigned task, her face arranged in the careful neutrality of a person withholding judgment while clearly exercising it. The other staff moved around Jessica with a choreographed distance, not rude enough to be reported, not warm enough to be mistaken for welcome. She did not take it personally. She had been navigating spaces that were not built for her since she arrived in Seoul 14 months ago. She understood that she was a disruption to an established order, and that people who have arranged their daily lives around an established order do not celebrate disruptions simply because the disruption means no harm. She would need to be patient. Patience was one of the things her life had given her in abundance. She woke every morning before 6. She had never been able to sleep past 6. Not since childhood, when her father would wake the house with his early morning radio and the smell of Abena's porridge. And she walked the estate. She learned which floorboards creaked and which doors needed lifting slightly to close without sound. She learned that the garden was most extraordinary at exactly the moment the sun cleared the outer wall, around 6:30, when the light came in low and turned everything briefly into a painting of itself. She learned that the kitchen had a small radio above the refrigerator tuned to a station playing old Korean trot music, and that turning it on softly in the early morning made the large space feel inhabited rather than empty. She also learned the people, which was always more important than the spaces. Mrs. O arrived 40 minutes before her official start time every morning and sat at the small staff table with barley tea and her phone, reading the same online forum thread about university entrance preparation with the focused worry of a woman who cannot sleep and has found a way to make her anxiety feel productive. Her daughter was sitting the National University Entrance Exam in 3 weeks. The girl had been preparing for 2 years. Jessica discovered this not by asking but by being present in the kitchen at 5:30 and staying quiet long enough that Mrs. O forgot to maintain her professional distance and simply became herself. "Which university is she hoping for?" Jessica asked one morning, looking at her own tea rather than at Mrs. O, giving the older woman the space to answer or not answer as she chose. Mrs. O's hands tightened slightly around her cup. "Yonsei," she said, "business administration. She must be exceptional." "She is." The words came with the unstoppable speed of a mother who has been holding that truth inside and cannot always keep it there. "She studies until 2 every morning. I told her to sleep, but—" She stopped, composed herself. "She is very dedicated. My father used to say," Jessica said carefully, "that the brain needs sleep the way a field needs rain. You can work the soil as much as you want, but without rain nothing grows properly." She paused. He was a teacher for 26 years. He knew how students learned. Mrs. O looked at her properly for the first time. "Your father sounds like he was a wise man," she said. "He was an ordinary man," Jessica said. "That was what was wise about him." 3 days later, after a conversation that moved naturally from the kitchen table to the phone, Jessica spent 2 hours helping Mrs. O's daughter practice interview responses, asking the kinds of specific, probing questions that required the girl to slow down and trust her own thinking. By the end of the second hour, the girl was doing it naturally, her answers finding their shape without the scaffolding of anxiety. Mrs. O found Jessica in the garden the following morning. She said it was the most useful practice she has had, she said without preamble. She said, "You asked difficult questions, but you asked them kindly." "That is how my father taught," Jessica said. Mrs. O nodded once. Something in her face shifted permanently, and from that morning forward the professional distance closed by precisely the right amount. Enough to be warmth, not so much as to be improper. It was a shift so subtle that someone not paying attention would miss it entirely. Jessica paid attention to everything. The estate's youngest gardener, Tae Yang, was 23, and carried the perpetually worried expression of someone bearing something heavy without being able to set it down. He worked with a focused quietness that Jessica recognized, the quietness of someone who cannot afford distraction, because in their life, distraction has always been expensive. She found out about his mother by accident. She was passing the garden shed one afternoon and heard him on the phone, his voice low and tight in the way voices go when you're trying to hold something together in a public space. I know, I just need a few more months. The calibration costs. Yes, I am handling it. He turned and saw her and went immediately still with embarrassment. You don't need to apologize, Jessica said. I wasn't listening on purpose. She paused. Hearing aid. He looked at the ground. His jaw worked for a moment. My mother. The current one is old. The recalibration. He stopped. It is fine. I am managing. I know you are, Jessica said. I'm just saying I heard. She walked away. That evening, she spent 40 minutes composing a carefully worded inquiry to the household financial manager about staff medical benefit structures, citing comparable household arrangements she had spent the afternoon researching. She was so reasonable and so precise about it that the benefit extension was approved 3 days later, without anyone feeling it was charity, least of all Tae-yang. When his mother received the recalibration, he did not know how it had happened. He suspected. He never asked, but he began leaving small bundles of fresh garden herbs outside Jessica's door in the mornings, tied with plain twine, without a note. She pressed one between the pages of her Bible and kept it. And then there was Ajuma Park, the cook, who had been making Min-jae's birthday, Myeok-guk, for 28 consecutive years without once being thanked for it. Jessica had been in the kitchen one morning when Min-jae passed through, and Ajuma Park had straightened slightly in the way of someone hoping to be noticed, and he had walked past with his phone without looking up, and the older woman's face had done something small and quickly suppressed that Jessica recognized the way you recognize a feeling you have had yourself in a different room. She sat at the kitchen counter the following afternoon. Teach me, she said. Ajuma Park turned from the stove. Teach you what? The Myeok-guk, his birthday recipe. I want to learn it properly. The older woman stared at her. Why? Because you have been making it for 28 years, Jessica said, and nobody has ever once asked how. That seems wrong to me. Ajuma Park was still for a long moment. Then she set down her spoon, wiped her hands on her apron, and began to explain. They spent 3 hours in that kitchen. Ajuma Park told her about the dried myeok from a supplier in Busan, who had been providing it for decades. She told her about the beef broth base and the precise timing of the seasoning that most people got wrong. She told her about the year Min-jae was 7 and had a fever on his birthday and could eat nothing except the soup, and how she had made 4 fresh batches throughout the day, so it was always warm. She told Jessica these things in the unguarded, continuous way of someone who has been waiting to be asked for a very long time. Jessica listened with her complete attention, the way her father had taught her to listen, not waiting for her turn to speak, but actually receiving what was being given. When she left the kitchen that evening, Ajuma Park watched her go. Omo, she said softly to the empty kitchen. This one is different. Min-jae's aunt arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, with the energy of a woman who had prepared for this visit the way a general prepares a military campaign. Kang Soo-yeon was 54 years old, dressed with pointed precision in a cream silk blouse and tailored gray trousers, carrying a gift she had no intention of giving, and accompanied by a friend whose sole apparent function was to provide an appreciative audience for whatever happened next. She walked into the Kang estate sitting room and found Jessica cross-legged on the floor, in front of the old upright piano in the corner, watching a tutorial video on the second-hand tablet Do-hyun had given her, and pressing keys with the effortful concentration of someone in the very early stages of acquiring a difficult skill. She was terrible. She hit a wrong note, winced, backed the video up and tried again, hit a different wrong note. Soo-yeon stood in the doorway and looked at her, The way people look at something they cannot decide is amusing or offensive. "You play?" she said. Jessica looked up. She took in the woman in the doorway. The silk blouse, the posture, the particular way she held her chin that communicated a lifetime of rooms where her opinion set the temperature, and made her assessment in a single quiet second. "Not yet," Jessica said pleasantly. She unfolded herself from the floor and stood, extending her hand with the natural ease of someone for whom greeting people properly is simply what you do. "I am Jessica. You must be family." Soo-yeon looked at the extended hand, at the dark brown skin, at the calluses along the palm, at the grandmother's gold stud earrings, before shaking it with the briefest contact, socially permissible. "Min-jae's aunt," she said. "Kang Soo-yeon." She looked Jessica over with an assessment so comprehensive and so undisguised that it crossed the boundary from rude into something almost impressively brazen. Then she turned to her friend. "Well, she is certainly substantial." She turned back with a smile that was designed to look pleasant. "I suppose there is something to be said for a strong constitution. Very practical, I imagine, for the kind of work you do." Her friend made a sound of delicate agreement. Jessica held the woman's gaze for one level second. Then she turned to the side table and picked up the teapot with both hands. "Can I pour you some tea?" she said. "Chairman Kong prefers the barley blend in the afternoons. I have been keeping it ready around this time." She poured with both hands, as was proper. Guest's cup first, setting the teapot down correctly. Every gesture exactly right. "I have also asked Ajuma Park to prepare some yuja chong tiok. She told me you prefer the yuzu variety over the red bean. I hope that is correct." Soo-yeon accepted her cup. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in her expression. The slight recalibration of a woman who expected a target and found something that did not behave like one. "How very thoughtful," she said after a moment. "I try to pay attention," Jessica said simply. She sat back down, not on the floor this time, but in the chair across from the sofa, with the easy, upright posture her father had insisted upon. Back straight, feet flat, the posture of someone who knows they belong wherever they have chosen to sit. Soo-yeon watched her over the rim of her teacup, with the expression of a woman updating a calculation. That night, at 2 in the morning, Jessica could not sleep. The bed was too soft. The silence of the estate was the wrong kind. Too complete without the sounds of Mapo district that she had grown accustomed to, without the distant traffic and the neighbor's television and the particular acoustic of a building full of ordinary lives being lived in close proximity. She pulled on her heavy cotton dressing gown, the one her mother had packed in the care package alongside the Ankara dress, thick and deep blue, with a pattern of small yellow suns that Abena had chosen because she said her daughter needed something warm for a cold country, and went downstairs to the kitchen. She made kenki. She did not have the fermented corn dough, but she had cornmeal, and she had the instinct of a woman who had grown up watching her mother feed people with whatever the kitchen contained, and she made something that was not quite kenki, but was close enough to be comforting. She added sardines from her tin and the shito she kept in a small jar at the back of the estate kitchen's enormous refrigerator. She sat at the counter in her yellow sun dressing gown and ate in the quiet, warm kitchen with the small radio, turned low to its trot station, and she thought about her father and her mother and Kofi, and the classroom in Kumasi, where Emmanuel Mensah had stood for 26 years with his hands clasped behind his back, knowing exactly where he belonged. She was still sitting there when she heard it. It came from the direction of the east wing, a sound that was wrong for a sleeping house, ragged and sharp, like something tearing. Then silence. Then the sound again, different this time, the sound of someone surfacing from deep water. She left her food on the counter. She followed the sound down the corridor to the smaller sitting room near the east wing. The door was not fully closed. She pushed it open. Minjae was on the floor. Not sitting, he had slid from the sofa and was on the floor with his back against it. Still in yesterday's clothes, both hands pressed completely flat against the floorboards as though confirming their solidity. His face was pale and damp. His breathing was fast and shallow and completely wrong. His eyes were open, but they were looking at something that was not in this room. Something far away and years ago and lit by the particular terrible light of a memory that does not fade with time. Jessica stood in the doorway. She took in the full picture without flinching from it. This feared, armored, carefully constructed man, completely undone on a sitting room floor at 2 in the morning, alone with whatever lived inside him that he had never shown anyone. She did not say, "Are you all right?" She did not say what happened. She did not perform concern for him or for herself. She went to the kitchen. She made 2 cups of barley tea. She had learned where everything was in this kitchen in the first week. She came back. She sat on the floor, a careful distance from him, close enough to be present and far enough to give him the dignity of not being crowded. She set 1 cup within his reach and held her own with both hands. She did not speak. She did not stare. She simply sat. The clock on the wall counted the seconds. The garden outside was completely dark and still. After 5 minutes, his breathing began to change. Slower, more even. He picked up the cup. He drank. He looked at it rather than at her. "You can go back to bed," he said. His voice was rough and lower than usual. "I was not sleeping anyway," she said. "The bed is too soft. I am not accustomed to it." Something crossed his face in the dim room. Not quite a smile. Something smaller and more careful than that. They sat without speaking. The tea cooled. The clock continued. Jessica looked at the dark rectangle of the window and thought about how silence in Ghana was never truly silent. There were always insects, always something alive in it, always the sense of the world continuing its business even in the middle of the night. The silence of this estate was different. It was the silence of a place that has been kept very carefully, which was not the same thing as peace. After a long while, he said without looking at her, "I dream about a parking garage." She waited. "I have dreamed about it since I was 9 years old." A pause. "I do not need to explain why." "You do not," she agreed. He said nothing more. She did not ask. She stayed, wrapped in her yellow sun dressing gown on his floor, in a country that was not hers, in a house that was not hers, sitting with a man she had not chosen, and who had not chosen her, until the darkness outside the window began to soften at its edges and the estate's garden birds started their morning conversation, and the night became something else entirely. At some point, without either of them deciding it, he fell into a sleep that looked, from the outside, like something approaching peace. She stayed until she was sure. Then she went quietly back to the kitchen, covered her food, washed the 2 cups and stood for a moment at the kitchen window, watching the garden come slowly into the morning light. She thought about her father, about the way he used to sit with students who were struggling, not fixing, not solving, just sitting, being present, letting them know that their difficulty did not make them alone. "You do not always have to have the answer," he had told her once. "Sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer another person is simply your presence. Let them know the room is not empty." She dried her hands on the kitchen towel. She went upstairs. She did not tell anyone about the parking garage. She did not tell anyone about it the following day, or the day after that, or in any of the days that followed. And Minjae noticed this, the way a man notices the absence of something he was bracing for. He had been waiting, with the careful, defensive readiness of someone who has learned that vulnerability is a currency that gets spent by the person you showed it to, for her to use it, to mention it in front of staff, to reference it in one of their arguments. They argued regularly about his management of the household and the way he spoke to people he considered beneath his attention and small things that were not really about small things at all. She never did. He found himself recalibrating something he did not yet have a name for. The late-night kitchen visits became their pattern without either of them naming it as such. It happened the way weather happens. Gradually, then completely. He began appearing at the kitchen doorway around midnight, still in his work clothes, with the particular exhaustion of a man who operates in a world where showing tiredness is dangerous and has no place to set it down except here. She was usually already there in her dressing gown, water on the stove, food on the counter. She had started making enough for two without thinking about it. He sat at the counter and she cooked and they talked. Not about the situation they were in. Not about the vow or the videos or the 43 countries or the family lawyers who were quietly working on the marriage documentation. They talked about other things. She told him about Kumasi, about Kajedia market on a Saturday morning, which was the largest open-air market in West Africa, and moved like a living thing. Thousands of people and colors and sounds compressed into a space that should not have been able to contain all of it and somehow did. She told him about the rainy season which arrived in Kumasi like an announcement, the sky going green-gray before the first drops, the smell of the earth receiving water after a long wait. She told him about her father's classroom, about the way Emmanuel Mensah had taught history, by making his students feel that the people in it were real and close and not yet finished with their business. Minjae listened in the way she had come to recognize as his genuine listening, not waiting for his turn. Actually receiving. He talked too, slowly, carefully, in the way of someone whose words have been stored in a locked room for so long, the door resists opening. He told her about the weight of authority, the particular loneliness of being in a room where everyone needs something from you and the performance of not needing becomes the air everyone breathes. He told her that he had not had a conversation in years that was not simultaneously a negotiation. He told her this without self-pity as a plain fact about his life, the way her father would have delivered a difficult historical truth to his students. Here is what is. Now let us think about what it means. My father used to say, Jessica said one evening, watching the steam rise from the pot, that power without someone to tell you the truth is just a very expensive way to be alone. Minjae was quiet for a moment. Your father said a great many things, he said. He was a teacher for 26 years, she said. He had a lot of time to think. She paused. Also, he was right about most of it, which helps. Something shifted at the corner of Minjae's mouth. Not quite a smile. The territory just before one. She told him one evening about the specific difficulty of being a large black woman in Seoul. Not with bitterness, but with the frank, unsentimental honesty of someone describing weather. The stares on the subway, the people who photographed her without asking, the way certain spaces contracted around her in ways that had nothing to do with her physical size. The loneliness of being visibly foreign in a country where foreignness was still, in certain rooms, a kind of offense. Minjae listened to all of it without interrupting, without offering solutions, without performing sympathy. He simply listened, and when she finished, he said, I am sorry that this country has done those things to you. It is not the whole country, she said fairly. It is some people. Most people are just people. You are more generous than I would be. You have never had to practice generosity the way some people have, she said without accusation. It comes differently when it has been required of you for a long time. He looked at her across the counter with an expression she was beginning to recognize. The expression of a man encountering an idea that requires him to rearrange something interior and doing it in real time without pretending he had already arrived there. She respected this about him, more than she had expected to. The market ambush happened on a Thursday morning. Jessica had gone out early to buy the specific brand of dried fish she used in her cooking. The estate kitchen was extraordinarily well stocked with Korean ingredients and completely without the West African pantry items that made food taste like home, and she had found a small Ghanaian grocery in Itaewon, that carried them. She was moving through the street, near the estate, market bag over her arm, moving with the efficient purpose of someone who has been running their own errands since they were 12 years old. The journalist was young and aggressive and had been camped near the estate for 3 days, waiting for exactly this moment. The camera was running before Jessica registered it was there. "Jessica, see!" The microphone appeared at face level. "The entire country believes you trapped Kang Min-jae, that you planned the whole incident. What do you say to that?" Jessica looked at the microphone, at the journalist, at the small crowd already assembling on the pavement behind her. Phones appeared in hands like the opening of flowers. She shifted her market bag to her other arm. She took one breath. "I think," she said, in the unhurried, considered voice of someone who has decided that honesty is less exhausting than management, "that people are more comfortable with a story where I am the villain. Because if I am not the villain, they have to ask themselves something more difficult. Why did 300 people in an expensive room all look at a trash bag on the floor and decide it was someone else's responsibility? That is a harder question than whether I am calculating. So, they asked the easier one instead." The journalist blinked, reset. "Do you love him?" Jessica looked at the microphone for a moment. "I am trying to know him," she said simply. "I think that is more honest than most things that get called love. Real love requires knowing someone first. I am doing the first part." She excused herself with a polite nod and continued toward Taiwan. The clip was 52 seconds. By the time she returned to the estate, it had 9 million views. By evening, 17 million. The comments section, for the first time since the gala, began to fracture. A significant portion of the voices shifting, not uniformly, not completely, but visibly, like a tide discovering a different pull. Min-jae watched the clip at midnight. He watched it 4 times. He put his phone face down on his desk and looked at the ceiling of his study for a long time. He thought about what she had said. "I am trying to know him. I think that is more honest than most things that get called love." He thought about the kitchen, about the yellow sun dressing gown, about the barley tea appearing in the dark without ceremony, about her voice telling him about Kejetia market and the rainy season and a teacher in Kumasi who had been right about most things. He thought about her hands on the counter, the calluses, the short nails, the hands of someone who had never been given anything she did not earn. He did not do anything with these thoughts. He had not yet reached the point of knowing what to do with them. But he stopped pretending, at least in the private honesty of his study at midnight, that he did not have them. The dreams had not stopped, but they were changing. He noticed this without fully understanding it. The parking garage was still there when he closed his eyes. The concrete pillar, the sound, the particular quality of light that he would recognize anywhere after 23 years of meeting it in sleep. But now, at the edge of the dream, before the worst of it arrived, there was something new, the smell of shea butter and something warm he still could not name. The sound of a radio playing trot music in an empty kitchen. The weight of a ceramic cup pressed into his hands in the dark. He lay awake one night thinking about this for a very long time. Then he got up and went to the kitchen. She was already there. She looked up from the counter when he appeared in the doorway, took in his face with a single quick assessment, and turned back to the stove. "Sit down," she said. "The water is almost ready." He sat. She made 2 cups. She set one in front of him. She sat across the counter and wrapped both hands around her own and looked at the small radio above the refrigerator. "My father," she said, without him asking, "used to get up at 4 in the morning sometimes. He said his brain needed the quiet hours to finish things it had started during the day. My mother would find him in the kitchen at sunrise, just sitting. She said she always knew whether it had been a good night by whether there was tea made or not." Min-jae looked at his cup. "There was always tea made," Jessica said. He was that kind of man. A long silence settled between them that was entirely comfortable. Tell me about him, Mensah said. She looked at him across the counter, at his face in the kitchen light, the careful neutrality softened by something that was becoming, slowly and without announcement, its honest self. She began to talk about her father. He listened until the sky outside the kitchen window went from black to the deep blue of very early morning, and then he listened some more. She did not notice exactly when it happened. That was the thing about gradual things. They did not announce themselves. They simply arrived, and when you looked back you could not identify the precise moment of crossing, because there had not been one. There had only been accumulation. Night after night in the kitchen, morning after morning in the garden at dawn when she walked, and sometimes he appeared on the stone bench near the far wall reading documents and looked up when she passed, and occasionally, without either of them planning it, set the documents down. Conversations that started about small things and ended somewhere neither of them had expected to go. She noticed it first in the way he spoke to Tae-yang one morning in the garden. Not warmly. Mensah was not a man who had learned warmth as a default, but with a consideration that had not been there before. A fractional pause before speaking that suggested someone checking themselves against a standard they had recently acquired. She had said something to him 3 weeks earlier about the way he addressed junior staff. He had argued with her. He had been wrong, and he had known it, and the pause in the garden with Tae-yang was him being right about it without announcing that he had changed his mind, which she understood was the closest thing to an apology that his particular architecture allowed. She found this quietly extraordinary. She also found, without meaning to and without welcoming it with any particular enthusiasm, that she had started looking for him in rooms she entered. Not obviously. Not in a way she would have been able to defend if someone had asked her about it directly. But she noticed his absence from spaces where he had previously been, and noticed his presence in spaces where she had not expected him, and both of these things were doing something to the interior geography of her days that she had not authorized. She thought about this one morning in the garden, sitting on the stone bench with her Bible open in her lap, but not reading it, watching the light move across the far wall. Her father had told her once that you could not argue with what your heart was learning. You could only decide what to do with the knowledge once it arrived. The feeling is not the problem, he had said. The feeling is just information. What you choose to do with it. That is where the character lives. She closed her Bible. She was not going to do anything with it. She was going to be sensible and clear-eyed and remember exactly what this situation was and how it had begun and what it was and was not. She was going to remember that she was Emmanuel Mensah's daughter and that Emmanuel Mensah's daughter did not lose her head over a complicated man in a difficult situation simply because he listened well and had started being kinder to the garden staff. She went back inside and made breakfast. She made enough for 2 without thinking about it. Shin Yu-jin arrived on a Wednesday without warning, which was itself a carefully considered statement. She had always understood the grammar of entrances. She walked into the Kang estate in a cream cashmere coat that had been selected with the precision of someone who understands that apparent neutrality can be a form of aggression, moving through the entrance hall with the ease of someone returning to a place they consider fundamentally theirs, regardless of what the current paperwork suggested. She was everything the visual language of Mensah's world had always expected. Tall, refined, Korean in the particular way that certain rooms in Seoul had always rewarded. Light-skinned, sharp-featured, with the kind of careful beauty that requires significant resources to maintain and is designed to signal that those resources are readily available. She and Mensah had been understood to belong to each other for 3 years, not officially announced, but as settled as unspoken arrangements between powerful families ever are. She had organized her entire future around that understanding. Then, a Ghanaian cleaning woman had picked up a trash bag, and the future had reorganized itself without asking her permission. She found Jessica in the sitting room. Jessica was at the piano again. She had been at it every afternoon for 2 weeks now and had progressed from terrible to merely inconsistent, which she considered significant personal growth. Tablet, propped against the music stand, pressing keys with the focused, unself-conscious concentration of someone who does not perform effort for an audience. Eugene stood in the doorway. Jessica looked up. She saw a tall, beautiful Korean woman in an expensive coat, looking at her with a smile that had been constructed with considerable skill and was missing something essential in the eyes above it. "Are you here to see Minjai?" Jessica asked pleasantly, closing the tablet. "I can let the staff know." "I am an old friend," Eugene said. Her eyes moved over Jessica in a single comprehensive assessment. Over the deep Ankara print dress, the natural hair, the dark brown skin, the grandmother's gold earrings, the full rounded figure, with the smooth, practiced invisibility of a woman who has spent her entire life assessing other women and has learned to make it look like nothing. "It is lovely to meet you," Jessica said, rising from the piano bench. "I am Jessica." She extended her hand. Eugene shook it. Her grip was precisely calibrated, firm enough to be not weak, brief enough to communicate its own message. "I know who you are," she said. "Everyone knows who you are." The smile remained exactly in place. "You are even more striking in person." "Thank you," Jessica said, accepting this with the serene directness of someone who has decided to receive everything at face value until proven otherwise. "Please sit down. I will ask Ajuma Park to bring tea." She said this with the natural ease of someone who belongs in the space she is moving through, who knows the cook's name, who understands the rhythms of the household. And Eugene, who understood the grammar of domestic power better than almost anyone, registered every syllable of it. She sat. She arranged herself beautifully. She smiled, and in the privacy behind the smile, she began to revise her projection of how difficult this was going to be. She did not attack directly. She was far too intelligent and too patient for directness. She worked in the negative space of things. In Minjai's presence, she was warm and fluent and completely at home in every reference point of his world. The families that mattered, the internal politics, the unspoken protocols of a life built on inherited power and carefully maintained reputation. She spoke this language the way a native speaker speaks their mother tongue, without translation, without effort, and she made sure, in small, precisely timed moments, that Jessica's foreignness to this language was visible. Never crudely. She was never crude. She would reference a name, a family connection, a shared history, an inside understanding, and allow the brief pause where Jessica's recognition should have been to speak for itself. She would ask Minjai's opinion on something from their shared past with the ease of someone reaching for something that has always been theirs, then turn to include Jessica in the conversation with an inclusiveness so carefully performed that it functioned as its opposite. But Eugene was also watching Jessica carefully, and what she saw concerned her. She saw that the staff liked her, not performatively, genuinely, in the way that cannot be manufactured by someone who does not mean it. She saw that Do Hyun received Jessica on the morning garden walks with the particular quality of attention he reserved for people he respected. She saw that Ajuma Park, who had never in 28 years of employment been observed laughing in the presence of a Kang family member, had been heard laughing in the kitchen 3 times in the past 2 weeks. And she saw, most dangerously of all, the way Minjai moved in Jessica's proximity. The fractional loosening, the way the permanent neutral mask occasionally, briefly, showed its seams, the way he sat at the kitchen counter, at midnight with a ceramic cup in his hands, looking like a man who has set something heavy down and is not entirely sure he wants to pick it back up. She adjusted her approach accordingly. The rumors started quietly. Online, first. The suggestion, appearing in several places, simultaneously, in the particular coordinated way of things that have been arranged, rather than occurring naturally. that Jessica's market interview had been coached, that someone had written those 52 seconds for her, that the composure, the precision, the exact right thing said at the exact right moment was the product of a media consultant paid for by the Kang family communications team. Then an edited video appeared. Jessica's words rearranged, clipped, recontextualized. The same sentences reading differently out of sequence. Calculating, cold, the words of someone performing humility for cameras with professional precision. Then photographs. Long lens, no consent. Ordinary moments reframed by caption and angle into evidence of a story the photographs alone could not actually tell. The public shifted again. The comments turned. The tide that had begun moving in Jessica's direction reversed. Jessica watched it happen from what felt like a very great distance. She did not have a publicist. She did not have a communications team. She did not have connections in Seoul's media landscape or experience navigating wars conducted in suggestion and implication and the strategic deployment of almost truths. She had her own character, which was real, and her father's lessons, which were true, and neither of these things were weapons in this particular battle. She called her mother on a Tuesday evening from the garden. "Mame," she said. "I am here," Abena said immediately, the way she always said it. "Tell me." "There is a woman," Jessica said. "She is very beautiful and very intelligent, and she has been working to make people believe I am something I am not. And it is working, and I do not know how to fight something I cannot hold." Her mother was quiet for a moment. The sounds of the chop bar came through the phone. Pots, voices, the rhythm of a kitchen that fed people every day without ceremony or recognition, simply because it was needed. "Your father," Abena said finally, "used to say that you cannot out-argue a lie that has already found a comfortable home. You can only live in a way that makes the lie increasingly uncomfortable." A pause. "Keep being who you are, Jessica. Do not let this woman borrow your face for her story." Jessica stood in the dark garden with the phone against her ear and the lights of the estate reflecting in the pond, and thought about her father saying that character is not what you do when everyone is watching. It is what you do when you believe nobody is. "Yes, Mommy," she said. "And eat something," her mother added. "You sound thin." "You cannot hear thin, Mommy. I am your mother. I can hear everything." Jessica laughed despite herself. Small and real, the kind that arrives before you decide to allow it. "I am eating. I made Kontomeyer stew last week with the garden spinach. Ajuma Park watched me make it and said she wanted to learn." "Good," Abena said, with the satisfaction of a woman for whom the sharing of food is the sharing of self. A person who wants to learn your food wants to know you. Remember that. The dinner was on a Friday evening. The full formal table, Do Hyun at the head, Soo Yeon on his left. Two cousins from the family's Busan connections, Min Jae across from Jessica, and Yoo Jin, invited by Soo Yeon with the precise timing of someone who understood exactly what they were doing. Seated 2 places from Min Jae with the settled ease of someone returning to a chair that had always been theirs. Jessica wore her Ankara wrap dress and her grandmother's earrings. She had learned enough about this family's dinner protocols to navigate them correctly. The seating, the serving order, the particular conversational register of a Kang family formal meal. She had learned it the way she learned everything, quietly and completely, and without announcing that she was doing it. She was doing well. She knew she was doing well. And then she looked up from her bowl and caught Min Jae's eyes on her from across the table. It was not the kitchen look. It was not the garden look or the piano room look or any of the looks she had been quietly collecting without acknowledging to herself that she was collecting them. It was something different. It was the look of someone who has been told something about a person they thought they knew and is holding that information against their own experience, trying to determine which source is more reliable. It lasted 3 seconds. Jessica set her chopsticks down. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I need some air." She walked out of the dining room with the even, unhurried pace she used for everything, through the kitchen, where Ajuma Park was plating the next course, and out through the garden door into the cold night air. She stood on the stone path with her arms wrapped around herself, her breath visible in the night air, looking at the lights of the estate, reflected in the long broken lines across the surface of the garden pond. She stood there for a long time. Then she sat down on the stone bench and took out her phone and looked at the photograph she kept on her lock screen. Her father standing in front of his classroom, hands clasped behind his back, exactly where he belonged. She did not call anyone. She simply sat with the photograph and let herself feel, for a few private minutes in the cold garden, the full weight of being far from home inside a situation she had not chosen, trying to hold on to who she was when the world kept trying to tell a different story about her. After a while, she became aware that she was not alone. She looked up. Minjae was standing on the garden path a careful distance away. He had followed her out. He was not wearing a jacket. He had come straight from the table, and the cold was visible in the set of his shoulders, but he was not moving to go back inside. They looked at each other in the dark garden. "You should not have done that," she said quietly. Not angry, simply true. "I know," he said. "You looked at me like you were deciding whether to believe something you knew was not true." A long pause. "I know." "She is very good at what she does," Jessica said, "but you're supposed to be better at reading people than this. It is, from what I understand, a professional requirement." Something moved across his face, not the almost smile, something that cost him more. "You are right," he said. "I was wrong. He stopped. "I am not accustomed to—" He stopped again. "To what?" she asked. He looked at her on the stone bench in her Ankara dress in the cold garden with her father's photograph on the phone screen in her hand, and the lights of his family's estate throwing their gold across the water between them. "To caring what I think about someone," he said finally. "I am not accustomed to it mattering." The garden was very quiet. Jessica looked at him for a long moment, at this complicated, difficult, slowly opening man standing in the cold without his jacket, because he had followed her out before he thought to get it. "Go back inside," she said. "You will be cold." "Jessica, I am not leaving," she said. "I just needed a moment. Go back inside. I will come in shortly." He stood for another moment. Then he went back inside. She sat in the garden for a few more minutes. She looked at her father's photograph. She thought about what he would say if he could see her here in this garden, in this country, inside this impossible situation. She thought he would probably say something true that she did not want to hear yet. She put her phone in her pocket and went back inside to finish dinner. She did not finish dinner. The moment she returned to the dining room, she understood from the quality of the silence that something had shifted in her absence. Eugene was speaking. Had been speaking, apparently, in the careful way of someone delivering information they have prepared. And the table had a particular stillness that Jessica recognized as the stillness of people who have just been told something and are deciding what to do with it. She did not sit back down. She looked at Minjae across the table. His face was the mask again, the full, complete, neutral mask of the entrance hall on the first day. The mask she had not seen on him in weeks. Something cold moved through her chest. "Excuse me," she said, for the second time that evening. "I am not feeling well. Good night." She went upstairs. She did not pack a bag that night. She was her father's daughter, and Emmanuel Mensah's daughter did not run from things in the dark. She sat on the edge of her bed, and she thought and she prayed in the way her mother had taught her. Not asking for outcomes, just asking for clarity, just asking to see clearly what was true and what to do with it. She thought about what her mother had said. Keep being who you are. Do not let this woman borrow your face for her story. She thought about what Do-hyun had said. We do not always get to choose our beginnings, only what we make of them. She thought about the kitchen at midnight, about the barley tea in the dark, about the parking garage and the two flat hands on the floor, and the man who had not been alone with his worst thing, because she had stayed. She turned off the light. She did not sleep for a very long time. Batch 5. The argument happened on a Thursday evening in the corridor outside the library. It was not their first argument. They had argued in the kitchen about his decision to cut the household maintenance budget without consulting anyone who actually managed the household day to day. They had argued in the garden about the way he had spoken to a delivery man. A man doing his job, Jessica had said. A man who woke up early and drove across Seoul to bring things to your door, and deserves to be spoken to like a person. And Min-jae had called this sentimental, and she had called his position exactly the kind of thinking that explained how someone ends up feared, but not respected, and neither of them had fully conceded, but both of them had privately adjusted their position, which was the closest thing to resolution their particular dynamic seemed to produce. Those arguments had had a quality to them that was different from the arguments Min-jae had with everyone else in his life. They had had the quality of two people who believe the other person is capable of better and intend to hold them to it. There had been heat in them, but never cruelty. There had been friction, but never the particular friction of someone trying to cause damage. This argument was different. It started, as the truly bad ones always do, from something small. He had passed her in the corridor outside the library and said, without stopping, without looking at her fully, with the particular studied casualness of someone who has been thinking about something for several days and is trying to make it sound like it has only just occurred to him. The market interview. The timing was very convenient. Jessica stopped walking. She turned. He had kept moving for 2 steps before he registered her silence and stopped and turned as well. "What did you say?" she said. He recognized in the single second after the words had left him that he had made a serious error. He recognized it the way you recognize the sound of something breaking in another room. Immediately, and already too late. He had not slept in 4 days. The SEO faction had been moving in ways that required constant attention. Yoo-jin had said something at dinner that had planted itself in him, the way a well-placed thing plants itself, not as belief, but as doubt, and doubt does not need to be believed to do its damage. He was tired, and he was wrong, and he did what tired people who know they are wrong sometimes do, he continued. I said the timing was convenient, he said. 52 seconds, the exact right words, the composure, it was very well executed. Jessica looked at him. In the amber light of the corridor wall, sconces her face was doing something he had never seen it do before. Not anger. He had seen her angry. It was direct and clear and resolved itself quickly. Not hurt in the performed way of someone seeking sympathy. Something quieter and more serious than either. The expression of a person who has been patient for a very long time and has just reached the precise boundary of their patience and is deciding what to do at the edge of it. You think I rehearsed it, she said. I think people are. You think, she said, with a quietness that was somehow more penetrating than volume would have been, that I rehearsed 52 seconds of a street ambush by a journalist I did not know was coming, on my way to buy dried fish in Itaewon, carrying a market bag, while thinking about what to make for dinner. She paused. That is what you think. Yoo-jin. Do not, she said. The name sat between them in the corridor like something that had been placed there deliberately. She knows things, he started. She knows how to make you uncertain about things you already know, Jessica said. That is a specific and different skill from knowing things. And you know the difference, Min-jae. You are one of the most perceptive people I have ever met, and you know the difference. You are simply choosing, right now, not to use that perception. Because using it would require you to admit something you are not ready to admit. He said nothing. His jaw was tight. "I have worked since I was 17 years old," she said. "I came to this country alone with a work visa and a single bag, and I have not asked a single person for a single thing I did not earn with my own hands. I picked up a trash bag because it was on a floor and I am a cleaner. I have been kind to every person in this house because they are people and they deserve kindness. I sat with you on a floor in the dark at 2 in the morning when you were shaking, and I did not tell a single soul about it, and I did not want a single thing from it except to make sure another human being was not alone with something terrible." She stopped. "Let that exist between them in the amber corridor light. If you genuinely cannot tell the difference between that and a performance," she said, "then I am not angry with you. I am sad for you, because it means this world you have lived in has taken something from you that you do not even know is gone." She looked at him for one more steady moment. "But I will not stand here and be looked at the way you looked at me across that dinner table," she said. "Not after everything. I deserve better than that from you specifically." She walked away, not upstairs, not to her room. She walked down the corridor and through the kitchen and out through the garden door, and she kept walking to the far end of the garden, where there was a stone wall, and she sat on the ground with her back against it in the cold, and she called her mother. Abena answered before the second ring. "Jessica! Mame!" And then, because she was alone and the garden was dark and she was very far from Kumasi, and she was her mother's daughter before she was anyone else's anything, she said, "I am tired." Her mother was quiet for a moment. The chop bar sounds were absent. It was late, the kitchen had closed. Abena was somewhere quiet, which meant she had been waiting for this call. "Tell me," her mother said. "He doubted me," Jessica said, "after everything. He looked at me across the table and I could see him deciding whether to believe something he knew was not true. And then tonight he said it out loud." "What did you say to him?" "The truth." "Good," Abena said. And then I walked away because I did not want to say something I would need to apologize for later." "Also good," her mother said. "Your father would be proud of that. He always said the most important words are the ones you do not say in anger." Jessica leaned her head back against the stone wall. The sky above the garden was the particular Seoul night sky. Not fully dark, never fully dark in a city this size. A deep charcoal gray with the city's light pressing up from below. In Kumasi, the night sky was black and enormous. She missed it with a sudden sharpness that surprised her. "Mommy," she said, "did you ever doubt yourself? When things were hard after Daddy, did you ever think maybe the people saying you could not manage were right?" Her mother laughed, not unkindly. The laugh of someone who has been on the other side of a hard thing long enough to see it clearly. "Every single day for the first year," Abena said. "Every morning I woke up and the doubt was already there waiting, like it had been up all night preparing." A pause. "But then I got up and opened the chop bar and cooked and served people, and at the end of the day the people had been fed and the chop bar was still standing and the doubt had nothing to stand on. Do you understand? You cannot argue with doubt. You can only outlast it." Jessica sat with this in the cold, dark garden. "Come home soon," her mother said. "Even for a few days, a person needs their ground." "I will," Jessica said. "Soon." She sat in the garden for another 20 minutes after the call ended. Then she went inside. She walked past the kitchen. She walked past the library corridor. She went upstairs, washed her face, sat on the edge of her bed, and opened her Bible to the passage her father had underlined in pencil decades ago. The pencil marks faded now to the color of old rain. "I have learned, in whatever state I am, to be content." Philippians 4:11. Emmanuel Mensah's favorite verse, not because it was easy, he had told her, because it was the hardest possible instruction and therefore the most important one to practice. She read it 3 times. Then she packed a bag. Not everything, not in anger. Deliberately, item by item, the way her father had taught her to make decisions, not running from something, but walking toward something, toward clarity, toward ground, toward herself. She left before 5 in the morning, when the house was still completely dark and silent. She left a note for Mrs. O on the kitchen counter. 4 words, precise and simple. I will be back. Because she was Emmanuel Mensah's daughter, and Emmanuel Mensah's daughter finished what she started, and she had not finished here yet, but she needed her ground first. Minjae did not sleep that night. He went to the kitchen at midnight. The water went on. 2 cups were set out. He stood at the stove and waited. The water boiled. He turned it off. He sat at the counter and looked at the 2 cups in the kitchen that was just a kitchen now. No yellow sun dressing gown, no smell of shea butter and something warm, no quiet voice telling him things about Kumasi and rainy seasons, and a teacher who had been right about most things. He sat there until 3 in the morning. He did not make the tea. He did not make anything. He simply sat in the silence of a kitchen that had become, without his permission and without his planning, the most important room in his life, and felt the specific and unfamiliar weight of having damaged something he had not understood, he valued until the moment he felt it change. He pressed his hands flat against the countertop, the way he pressed them against floors in parking garages in his sleep. He was still there when Ajuma Park arrived at 5:30 to begin the morning preparations, and found him sitting at the counter in yesterday's clothes with the empty cups and the unboiled water, and an expression she had never seen on his face in 28 years of working in this house. She did not say anything. She simply went to the stove, boiled the water, made tea, and set a cup in front of him. He looked at it. She left this morning, Ajuma Park said, not looking at him, busying herself with the morning preparations, with the tactful focus of a woman who understands that some things need to be said into the middle distance rather than directly. Before 5, she left a note for Mrs. O. Minjae said nothing. She said she will be back, Ajuma Park said. Then after a pause, in the careful tone of someone who has decided that 28 years earns you one direct statement, you should make sure she means it. His grandmother found him in the library at 9 that morning. Kang Soon-hee moved slowly now. Her hip had been giving her trouble since the winter, but she moved with the particular deliberateness of someone who has decided that slowness is not an obstacle, but simply the pace at which things worth doing get done properly. She came into the library and sat in the chair across from where Minjae was sitting, without a book, without his phone, without anything except his own hands on the chair arms and his eyes on the window. She sat with him in silence for a full 5 minutes. Then she said, "How long has she been making you tea?" Minjae looked at his grandmother. Soon-hee was 80 years old and had the eyes of someone who has seen enough of the world to have stopped being surprised by any of it, and has arrived, on the other side of all that knowledge, at something that looked like peace. She looked back at him with complete patience. She hummed, Soon-hee said, in the kitchen at night, while she waited for the water to boil. I heard it from my room on the nights I could not sleep. The same few notes over and over. A song I did not recognize. Something from home, I think. She paused. I had not heard someone hum in this house in a very long time. Minjae looked at the window. I said something I knew was not true, he said. I said it anyway. Yes, Soon-hee said. No cushioning, no comfort offered prematurely. I said it because... He stopped, began again. Because she has gotten past something. Inside me. Something I did not give her permission to get past. And that frightened me. And I reached for the thing that would create distance. Because distance has always been the safest position. Yes, Soon-hee said again. That is not an excuse. No, she agreed. It is not. A long silence. She told me, he said quietly, that if I could not tell the difference between who she is and a performance, then something has been taken from me that I do not even know is gone. He paused. She was right. She usually is, Soon-hee said. I have been watching her for 3 months. She is usually right, and she knows it, and she does not perform knowing it, which is rarer than you understand. He looked at his grandmother, at her 80-year-old face, which had watched him since he was 9 years old, pressing his hands against parking garage floors in his dreams, and had never once stopped loving him through all the difficult and complicated years of becoming who he was. She deserves better than someone who reaches for distance when he is afraid, he said. Yes, Soon-hee said. So stop reaching for it. She leaned forward slightly. You stopped looking at her size a long time ago. You stopped seeing anything you were afraid of a long time ago. You are just afraid to admit what you started seeing instead. He said nothing. What did you start seeing instead? She asked. The library was very quiet. Outside the window, the garden was bright with winter morning light. Everything, he said, very quietly. I started seeing everything. Soon-hee sat back in her chair with the expression of a woman who has just heard the answer she already knew was coming and is satisfied by its arrival. Then go and tell her that, she said, before she decides that clarity is more comfortable than this. His grandfather found him in the garden an hour later. Do-hyun sat beside him on the stone bench without preamble, in the way of a man who has decided that, at 81 years old, preamble is a luxury he can no longer afford. Your grandmother, Do-hyun said, looking at the garden rather than at his grandson, was the daughter of a fisherman from Tongyong. When I told my family I intended to marry her, my father did not speak to me for 4 months. My mother cried for 2 weeks and called it grief. He paused. They said she was beneath us. They said I was throwing away everything the family had built for the sake of sentiment. Min-jae listened. She had hands like your... He stopped, started again. She had the hands of someone who had worked hard with them. She smelled like the sea. She spoke plainly and directly, and she was the only person in my life, in 60 years of accumulating power and resources and influence, who consistently told me the truth when I did not want to hear it. He paused. Do you understand what that is worth? When you have power, when everyone around you is performing loyalty, performing love, performing agreement, because they need things from you and the performance is the price of access. Min-jae said nothing. He was listening in the way Jessica had taught him, without preparing his response, actually receiving. It is worth everything, Do-hyun said. The power, the resources, the influence, all of it together is not worth one person who will sit with you in the dark and tell you the truth. He turned and looked at his grandson directly for the first time. She left this morning. I know. She left a note that said she will be back. I know. She is Emmanuel Mensah's daughter, Do-hyun said. Her father was a teacher in Kumasi, who taught his children that honest work is never beneath a person of dignity. He let this sit for a moment. I had her looked into thoroughly before our first meeting. I do this with everyone. In 60 years of doing it, I have never once read a file on a person and felt what I felt reading hers. Min-jae looked at him. Respect, Do-hyun said simply. Complete and unqualified respect. Before I had even met her. He stood, slowly, with the deliberate care of a very old man preserving his dignity. She is in Mapo, her old building. The manager confirmed she arrived this morning. He straightened his jacket. Do not wait long enough for her to get too comfortable with the clarity. He walked back toward the house. Min-jae sat on the stone bench in the winter morning light for a long moment. Then his phone rang. It was his head of security. The call was 5 sentences long. We have a problem. Jessica Mensah, Mapo district. 3 men. Come now. He was already moving before the call ended. Jessica had been back in her Mapo room for 6 hours when they came through the door. She had spent those 6 hours doing ordinary things with the deliberate focus of someone using ordinary things as an anchor. She had unpacked her bag, She had made kontomire stew with the ingredients from the Itaewon grocery that she had brought back with her. She had called Kofi, who was in the middle of an exam period, and sounded simultaneously stressed and fine in the way of 21-year-olds, for whom stress and fine are not mutually exclusive. She had sat on her single bed, with her Bible and her father's photograph, and the thin mattress that did not dip on the left side and the window that faced the courtyard and the sounds of Mapo district that were the right kind of sounds. The sounds of ordinary lives being lived at close range. She had been sitting at the small table, eating her stew and thinking about what her mother had said, outlast the doubt, when the door opened. 3 men, fast, coordinated, professional. Her first thought was not fear. Her first thought, arriving with the clarity that comes when the mind strips everything unnecessary, was her father's voice. Panic is just energy that has not found its direction yet. Find the direction. She stood up from the table. She looked at the 3 men, at the door, at the window, at the distances. "Hey!" She said it loudly and sharply, the voice she had used exactly twice in her life, both times when she needed immediate compliance without question. "Hey, do not move, any of you." They moved. She ran. Not toward the door. They were between her and the door. She ran toward the window, threw it open, looked down at the fire escape below, looked back at the men crossing the room toward her, made her calculation in the half-second available to her, and screamed at the top of her voice into the Mapo morning air. Not a scream of fear, a deliberate scream, the kind designed to be heard and identified as a problem by everyone within range. Then the first man reached her. She fought. She was not a small woman, and she was not a passive one, and Emmanuel Mensah had raised her to understand that her body was her own and belonged to nobody who had not been given it. She fought with everything she had, which was considerable, and it was not enough against 3 professionals. But it was enough to mean that what should have taken 30 seconds took closer to 3 minutes, and made enough noise that 2 of her neighbors opened their doors into the hallway and saw enough to call the police before the men got her into the vehicle. She was in the vehicle. The door closed. The city moved past the tinted windows. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs. The way he pressed his hands against floors, she thought, and almost laughed at the specific wrongness of the moment. And she began to count. Turns, times, the quality of light through the glass. The sound of the road surface, changing from city to industrial. The smell of the air shifting. She filed everything away. She breathed. She thought about her father standing in his classroom with his hands clasped behind his back, knowing exactly where he belonged. She belonged to herself. That was not something 3 men in a vehicle could change. She looked out the tinted window at the city moving past, and she began to plan. Batch 6. The warehouse was in the Incheon Industrial District, 43 minutes from Mapo by Jessica's count. She knew it was 43 minutes because she had counted every one of them, measured against her heartbeat, which she had slowed deliberately, the way her father had taught her to slow it before difficult things. 3 counts in, hold for 4, release for 5. He had learned it himself from a doctor friend who said it was the fastest way to return the mind to usefulness when the body wanted to panic. Emmanuel Mensah had taught it to his daughter when she was 11 years old and terrified before her first public speaking competition, and she had used it in the years since before job interviews and difficult conversations, and one very frightening encounter with a drunk man on a Kumasi bus when she was 19. She had never needed it more than she needed it now. She had also counted the turns, 14, and noted the road surfaces and the smell of salt water entering the air somewhere around the 30-minute mark, which suggested coastline, which suggested the industrial areas west of central Incheon. She had noted the 3 entry points she could identify from her position in the back of the vehicle. She had noted that the 2 men flanking her were watching forward, not sideways, which was a professional habit that assumed the person being transported had already accepted the situation. She had not accepted the situation. She had simply not yet found the right moment. The warehouse resolved itself through the tinted window as a large corrugated metal structure set behind a chain-link fence in a block of similar structures. Industrial light, flat and gray. The kind of area that is busy in the day and completely empty at night, and has therefore been chosen with care. They brought her inside. The interior was large and cold, with a high corrugated ceiling and industrial overhead lights that threw harsh white pools with deep shadows between them. She catalogued it in the first 30 seconds. Main rolling door on the north wall, a personnel door on the east, a loading bay door on the west that was padlocked from the inside. 2 guards on the main door, 1 near the east exit, 1 moving patrol with a rotation she timed at approximately 4 minutes and 20 seconds per circuit. Wooden crates stacked along the eastern wall. A folding table and chairs set incongruously in the center of the space, like the setup for a meeting, which she supposed was accurate. They sat her on a crate near the eastern wall. She folded her hands in her lap. She straightened her back. She took off her jacket. She was warm from the fight in the apartment, and the adrenaline was still moving through her, and she needed to think clearly, and overheating was not useful, and folded it neatly over the edge of the crate beside her. One of the guards noticed the folded jacket and looked at it with an expression of someone encountering something they did not expect. She looked back at him pleasantly. Then Seo Byung-chul walked in. He was not what she had prepared herself for. She had prepared herself for aggression, for performance of power, for the theatrical cruelty of men who need their captives to be afraid of them, because fear is the only currency they understand. What walked in instead was a man in his mid-50s, in a well-cut dark suit with silver hair, combed with precision, carrying himself with the calm of someone who makes decisions in boardrooms and has simply relocated today's boardroom to a warehouse in Incheon because the agenda required it. He had someone bring a folding chair. He sat across from her. He looked at her folded jacket on the edge of the crate. He looked at her hands, folded in her lap. He looked at her face, which was giving him nothing he could use. "I want to apologize," he said, in Korean that was formal and precise, "for the manner of this. It was inelegant. You were not meant to be frightened." Jessica looked at him for a moment. "I was not frightened," she said, in Korean that was accented and imperfect and completely functional. She had been learning for 14 months and she was not yet fluent, but she was considerably further along than anyone who had not been paying close attention would know. "I was inconvenienced." Something moved across Seo Byung-chul's face. A recalibration. "Your Korean is better than I expected," he said. "Most things about me are different from what people expect," she said. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was, improbably, the beginning of genuine respect. Then he leaned forward slightly and explained the situation, with the directness of a man who respects efficiency. The SEO faction had been watching Kang Min-jae for 8 months. They had identified the incremental withdrawal from full operations, the quiet cooperation with law enforcement, the slow unwinding of obligations. They wanted it reversed. They wanted a return to the previous arrangement under cooperative oversight, and they had identified, with the accurate perception of people who watch powerful men very carefully, that Kang Min-jae had developed, for the first time in his adult life, a point of vulnerability. "You," Byung-chul said simply. "You are why you are here." Jessica looked at him steadily. "He will not negotiate with you," she said. "No," Byung-chul agreed pleasantly. "We are aware. He will attempt to come through the front door. That is also acceptable to us. We have prepared for that response quite thoroughly." "Then why are we having this conversation?" "Because I wanted to meet you," he said, and then with a candor she had not expected. "The market interview. I watched it many times. You said something true in 52 seconds that most people cannot say in 52 years. He paused. I wanted to understand what kind of person does that. Jessica looked at him. The kind of person, she said carefully, whose father was a teacher who told her the truth was always the shortest distance between 2 points. Byung-chul was quiet for a moment. Then he stood. He adjusted his jacket. "You will not be harmed," he said. "You have my word." "The word of a man who had me taken from my home," she said. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the contradiction without resolving it, and walked back toward the far end of the warehouse. Jessica watched him go. Then she looked at the east exit door, at the guard positioned beside it, at the rotation of the moving patrol, at the crates stacked along the eastern wall that created a partial visual obstruction between her position and the main door. She had been in here for 11 minutes. She began to plan in earnest. Min Jae's intelligence team located the warehouse in 2 hours and 19 minutes. In those 2 hours and 19 minutes, he did not sit. He stood at the center of his operations room in the Kang estate, and he was completely, absolutely still, in the way of a man who has moved every non-essential thing into a locked room and is operating on what remains, which was precise and cold and entirely focused on a single point. His team worked faster than they had ever worked. They understood the stillness. They had seen it before in situations that were discussed afterward in careful, lowered voices. They had never seen it directed at a person, rather than an operation, which was a distinction that made them work faster still. It was during the second hour that his head of intelligence placed a document in front of him, an intercepted communication, internal. The SEO faction had known Jessica's schedule in Mapo, her precise departure time from the estate, her specific building, her daily movements, information that could only have originated inside the Kang household. Min Jae read the document once, read it again. His team traced the source in 38 minutes. The name at the end of the trace was Shin Yu-jin. Min Jae looked at the name on his screen for 10 seconds. His face did not change. He gave 2 quiet instructions to his head of security, instructions that were delivered and acknowledged without discussion, because the tone in which they were given left no room for discussion. And then he put it away completely and kept moving. There would be time for that later. Right now there was only the warehouse in Incheon, only Jessica, only the fact that he had been sitting in a garden 40 minutes ago, failing to be the man she deserved, and now he was going to have the chance to be something closer to it, and he was not going to waste the chance. He went through the front door. It was not clean. Real things rarely are. The front door of the warehouse came in on the second impact, Min Jae's shoulder, then his team's equipment. And what followed was fast and loud and conducted in the specific, brutal grammar of people who are not performing for anyone, who have a single objective and are moving toward it with the focused efficiency of complete commitment. He took a cut on his left forearm from a blade he did not fully clear. He registered it as heat and pressure and kept moving. He registered nothing else, not the sounds, not the other men, not the cold or the light or the blood soaking through his jacket sleeve, because all of his processing capacity was directed at a single vector. The eastern wall, the crates, the locked room. His intelligence had told him was behind the loading area. He found the locked door. He tried the handle. Locked. He stepped back and put his shoulder to it once, and it held. Twice, and the lock mechanism cracked. 3 times, and the door opened. The room was small. 1 high window letting in a rectangle of flat gray Incheon light, a single overhead bulb, and Jessica, sitting upright on a wooden crate near the far wall with her hands folded in her lap and her jacket folded neatly beside her, and a half-empty bottle of water on the ground, looking at the door that had just opened, with the expression of someone who has been expecting company and is not entirely surprised by its arrival. She looked at him. He crossed the room in 4 steps, and his hands went to her face, both palms against her jaw, tilting her face upward, turning it left and right with the frantic, focused urgency of a man running a diagnostic he absolutely needs to pass. Checking her eyes, her face, her neck, her arms, her hands, looking for damage with the desperate thoroughness of someone who has been imagining damage for 2 hours and 19 minutes and needs to disprove every version of it. "I am fine," she said. "You are not supposed to be here," he said, meaning Mapo, meaning away from the estate, meaning away from him. The words came out with more in them than he had given them permission to carry. "You are bleeding," she said. She was looking at his left forearm. The cut had soaked through the jacket sleeve in a dark, spreading stain. She reached for his arm, and he let her take it, turning it toward the light, assessing it with the same practical efficiency with which she assessed everything. Quickly, without drama, moving directly to what was needed. She pulled at the inner lining of her folded jacket, not her good jacket, the lining, and tore a clean strip with quick, certain hands. She pressed it against the cut and wrapped it with the focused competence of someone who has dealt with worse in less convenient circumstances. He watched the top of her head while she worked, at the natural hair, at the small gold stud earring visible below the hairline, at the precise, unhurried movements of her hands on his arm. "Jessica," he said. "Hold still," she said. "I need to say something." "You need to hold still," she said. She tied the makeshift bandage. She looked up at him. Her dark brown eyes were very close to his and completely steady, and carrying something in them that had been building since a kitchen at 2 in the morning, and a barley tea set on a floor in the dark, and a yellow sun dressing gown, and all the accumulated weight of ordinary moments that had turned out not to be ordinary at all. "Not here," she said, quietly. "Not in a warehouse in Incheon while you are bleeding on the floor." "Then when?" She looked at him for a moment. "When we are home," she said. The word landed between them the way it had landed before, in the dim light of a locked room in an industrial warehouse in Incheon, carrying everything she had not yet said, and he had not yet said, and all of it, settling into that single syllable, home, like it had always lived there. "Okay," he said. His team had secured the perimeter. Someone appeared in the doorway to report that Byung-chul was in custody, and the situation was contained and the police were 4 minutes out. Min-jae acknowledged this without looking away from her. Then he took her hand, her calloused palm in his, her short nails, the hands of Emmanuel Mensah's daughter, who had come from Kumasi to Seoul on a work visa with a single bag and had picked up a trash bag in a ballroom because it was on the floor, and she was a cleaner, and that was her work, and had not known in that moment that the simple, honest act of doing her job in front of 300 people who had all decided it was someone else's responsibility was going to change everything. They walked out of the warehouse into the gray Incheon afternoon, hand in hand, and neither of them looked back. Eugene role in the kidnapping did not remain private for long. The evidence was specific and documented and irrefutable, and Min-jae had neither the inclination nor the patience to manage it quietly. Legal proceedings began within the week and moved with the efficient speed of a family that has decided something must be addressed and has the resources to ensure it is addressed correctly and completely. She did not contest the evidence. Her lawyer issued a statement. She left Seoul before the month was out. She did not return. There was no final confrontation, no last words exchanged in a dramatic setting. She simply became someone who had been present and was no longer, which was its own kind of verdict, and in Jessica's estimation, a more fitting one than anything theatrical would have been. The CO faction's dismantling took longer and required a kind of cooperation that would have been unthinkable to Min-jae 2 years earlier. It happened in stages, carefully, without announcement. A series of incremental steps away from a world he had been born into, without consultation. There were obligations that required time to unwind, and histories that needed careful handling, and a world that does not release its members quickly or without cost. But the direction was set, and the man who had been defined for 32 years entirely by where he came from had decided, with the particular, quiet certainty of someone who has found something worth changing for, that where he was going mattered more. Do-hyun watched each step with the expression of a man who has been patient for a very long time and is experiencing the complicated, specific satisfaction of watching something arrive that he has been waiting for. They were married in the spring, not a large wedding. Neither of them wanted a large wedding. A garden ceremony at the estate with family and the people who had become, over the months of an impossible situation, slowly becoming a real life, something close to a community. Mrs. O was there, and Tae Yang, and Ajoma Park, who cried into her apron and denied it. Do-hyun sat in the front row, with Soon-hee's hand in his, and looked at his grandson with the eyes of a man reviewing everything he has built, and finding, for the first time in a long time, that the review is satisfactory. Jessica wore white and gold, a dress made by a Ghanaian seamstress in Itaewon, who had seen the news like everyone else and had sent a message 6 months ago, saying if you ever need a dress made properly, call me, and had meant it. The dress was constructed with the particular skill of someone who understands how to dress a full-figured woman with joy rather than apology. It had Ankara print panels at the hem and the cuffs. It was the most beautiful thing Jessica had ever worn, and she wore it with the complete ease of someone entirely comfortable in their own body. Abena Mensah flew from Kumasi and sat in the second row and did not cry during the ceremony, which everyone who knew her understood required an extraordinary and sustained act of will. She cried for 45 minutes afterward in the kitchen with Ajoma Park while both women pretended they were checking on the food. Kofi wore a suit he had bought specifically for the occasion and spent most of the reception taking photographs to send back to everyone in Kumasi who had asked him to be their eyes. Jessica's father was not there, but he was there. He was in the gold stud earrings she wore. He was in the straight spine and the level eyes and the voice that said true things without apology. He was in every lesson she had carried from Kumasi to Seoul and had refused, despite everything, to put down. They went back to the Grand Hyatt Seoul 1 year after the gala, the annual Kang Foundation charity gala. The same chandeliers, the same golden light, the same ballroom architecture, but different, recognizably, meaningfully different in a way that could be felt before it could be named. The event's charitable structure had been rebuilt in the months since, with a significant portion of the proceeds now directed to practical programs rather than the performance of concern. This had been Minja's doing, proposed quietly and implemented completely, one of the first of many incremental acts of becoming someone different from the man who had kicked a trash bag across this floor 12 months ago. Jessica wore the deep green dress she had chosen herself. Her hair was styled and her grandmother's earrings were in her ears and she looked like herself, which Mrs. O had said in the hallway before they left was the highest possible achievement, and which Jessica had agreed with completely. They arrived together, on time, no 12-minute delay, no performance of power, simply Minjae and Jessica, walking through the entrance of the Grand Hyatt Seoul ballroom together, into the golden light, into the room where it had started. People looked. Of course they looked. This was still the story everyone had an opinion about, the story that had trended in 43 countries. The story of a trash bag and a vow and a cleaning woman who had crossed a ballroom floor and changed everything. They looked and Jessica met the looking with the level, undefended steadiness of someone who has decided that being seen, clearly, is not a threat. They stopped in the center of the ballroom. The orchestra was playing something soft and formal. The chandeliers threw gold across the white marble floor. Around them, the room moved in its elegant, careful way. Minjae reached into his jacket pocket. Jessica's eyes went immediately to his hand. He produced a small, neatly tied trash bag. She stared at it. "Kang Minjae," she said. "I was thinking," he said, with the expression of a man very pleased with himself, "about symmetry." "Do not," she said. "The poetic. If you place that on this floor," she said, with the particular calm of someone who means every word. "I will walk to the other side of this ballroom, and I will stand there for the rest of the evening, and I will smile at everyone who asks me about it, and I will not feel badly about it at all." He looked at her. "You would do it," he said. "Without hesitation," she confirmed. The trash bag went back into his pocket. He turned to face her fully in the center of the ballroom, where it had all begun, with 300 people around them and 40 million witnesses worth of history between them. And he took both her hands in his, the way he had taken them in a locked room, in an Incheon warehouse. Her calloused palms in his, her grandmother's gold earrings catching the chandelier light, her dark brown face looking up at him with the complete, unguarded expression of someone who has stopped protecting herself from a feeling, because she has decided the feeling is worth every single thing it cost. "I thought you were my punishment," he said quietly, "for her, not for the room. When you crossed that floor, and the whole world started filming, I thought the universe was settling a debt. I thought you were the price of every arrogant, careless, empty thing I had ever done." She waited. "But that is not what you are," he said. "You are the person who sat with me at 2 in the morning and did not need anything from it. You are the person who learned everyone's names in this house because you actually cared, who told me the truth in a corridor when it would have been much easier and much safer to go quiet, who picked up a trash bag in front of 300 people who had all decided it was someone else's problem." He paused. "You are Emmanuel Mensah's daughter, and Emmanuel Mensah raised someone who does honest work without apology, and tells the truth without calculation, and walks into rooms and does not apologize for taking up space in them." His voice dropped lower. "Picking up that trash bag," he said, "saved my life." Jessica looked at him for a long moment. At this man who had kicked a trash bag across a ballroom floor, in a moment of cold, clarifying disgust at the hypocrisy of the room around him, and had not known, in that moment, what he was setting in motion. Who had pressed his hands flat against floors in parking garages in his dreams for 23 years, and had not known, until a woman in a yellow sun dressing gown sat on his floor at 2 in the morning, and did not ask for anything, that the room did not have to be empty. "You kicked it into the middle of the floor," she said, for the last time, because it was true, and she was her father's daughter, and her father's daughter said true things. "I just did my job." "Yes," he said, "you did. You just did your job." In front of 300 people who had all decided it was someone else's. And that, he stopped. Something moved across his face that had no relationship to the neutral mask and never would again. "That was the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen." She squeezed his hands. "My father," she said, "would have liked you, eventually. After he had asked you approximately 47 questions and made you explain yourself in considerable detail." "I would have answered all 47, he said. "You would have had to," she agreed. "He was a teacher. He had time." He laughed. A real one, the kind she had learned to recognize, that arrived before he decided to allow it, that changed his face completely, from the face the world was given, into the face that was actually his. She loved that laugh. She had not told him so yet, but she was going to, in her own time, when the moment was right, because she was Emmanuel Mensah's daughter, and Emmanuel Mensah's daughter did not rush the things that mattered. He took her hand, one hand this time simply, the way you hold the hand of someone you have chosen and intend to keep. And they turned together and walked forward into the golden light of the ballroom. Behind them, somewhere in the deep pocket of a charcoal jacket, a small ridiculous trash bag waited for a moment that had already passed. The story the world had told about them was finished. The one that had begun on a marble floor with a kicked trash bag and a woman who did not look back when she walked away. That story had found its ending. but the one they were writing together. The real one. The one that started with honesty and continued with patience and was made of late-night kitchens and garden benches and 47 questions from a teacher in Kumasi who had raised his daughter to walk into rooms and not apologize for taking up space in them. That one was only beginning, and it had started, as the best ones always do, with someone willing to do the honest work that everyone else had walked past. And that is the story of Jessica Mensah, Emmanuel Mensah's daughter, from Kumasi, Ghana, who came to Seoul on a work visa and picked up a trash bag and changed the life of the most feared man in the city. She did not do it for love. She did not do it for money or strategy, or any of the reasons the world decided to assign to her. She did it because it was her job and because her father had taught her that honest work is never beneath a person of dignity. And she was right, and he was right, and the lesson traveled all the way from a classroom in Kumasi to a ballroom in Seoul and changed everything it touched. If this story did something to you, if you held your breath in that warehouse, or felt something in that kitchen in the dark, or found yourself thinking about your own father, your own mother, your own person who taught you how to walk into a room, then this channel is exactly where you belong. If this is your first time here, welcome. I am so glad this story found you. This is a channel for people who believe that ordinary people do extraordinary things every single day, and that love, when it is real, does not care about the door it walks through. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. You do not want to miss what is coming next. If you have been here before, you already know. Drop a comment and tell the new people what this community means to you. Let them know they are in the right place. And everyone, hit the like button before you leave. 1 second. It costs you nothing, and it helps this story reach someone who needs it tonight. Now, 2 questions before you go, and I want real answers in the comments. First, if you had been standing in that ballroom that night with 300 people watching and every phone already raised, would you have picked up the trash bag? Be honest. Think about it. Tell me below. Second, and this is the one I cannot wait to see. Where in the world are you watching this from? Right now. Your city, your country, your small town. Drop it in the comments. I want to see how far Jessica's story has traveled. I read every single comment. Everyone. Until the next story. Take care of yourselves. Take care of the people around you. And remember what Jessica knew, what Emmanuel Mensah taught her, what she carried all the way from Kumasi to Seoul and never once put down. Honest work is never beneath a person of dignity. See you in the next one.